In this movie, we're going to take a look at the column types available in MySQL to handle the date and time. Let's go to our sample database and take a look at the complaints table. As we can see, we have 4 columns in there. Now, let's add a date and time column in which we can record exactly when a certain complaint was made. Before we do that, let's take all this data out of the complaints table, which we'll do with a delete statement without a where clause. Dangerous thing to do, but considering we just have 3 test rows in here, doesn't really matter. Now let's use the alter table syntax to create a new column in the complaints table. And we're going to call our column when made. And the column type is going to be a new column type you haven't used yet, and that's datetime. This stores both the date and the time in a format which you're going to see very soon. Let's make that one not null. Now what happens when we insert into the complaints table? Let's specify the columns we want to insert into, and our new column, all the existing columns and our new column that we've just added, apart from the complaint ID, which of course will be auto-incremented. And we're going to specify some values for the customer ID, the level of rage with which they made their complaint, a reason why they're complaining, and finally we're going to insert a date and time into the when made column. Now we could manually insert a date and time in this format: year, month, day, and then the time. Alternatively, we could use this function now. What this function does is a very handy little function. It inserts the date and time into that column without us having to check the time and find out what it is. I say that now is a very handy little function because it works not only with the date time column type, but also the other time and date columns that we're going to find out about later in this movie. For now, let's insert this piece of data into our complaints table and take a look at what the result is. Now, because the columns are slightly exceeding the size of the console window I have open, we're getting a bit of distortion here. So I hope you'll bear with me. You can still see, I hope, even though the row is wrapping around slightly, that the date has been entered and the time into the when made column. That's been done with our now function. So this is a very handy way of storing the date and time in MySQL. Just a moment ago I mentioned some more column types for handling the time and the date. Let's create a new table to show those different column types. Now this is a very arbitrary table format. We're just going to use one column per particular column type that handles date and time. So let's start out with a timestamp, and then a date time, which is the one we just discovered a moment ago, and then a simple date column, a time column, and a year column. And these are MySQL's column types which handle date and time. Now, Let's insert some data into our time demo table. We're going to put these values in. Now for the timestamp. Now for the date time. Now for the date. Now for the time. And now for the year. As you can see, we're inserting into a whole range of different column types, but we're using the same function for each of them. That's why the now function is so handy. We don't really need to worry about which kind of date or time column type we're inserting into. We can just use this one function, and it will be interpreted in different ways depending on the column type in which it's entering data. Let's take a look at what we've just entered. As we can see, the date and time in the second column has been entered in the same way as it was in the complaints table. If you look at the first column, you'll notice, although that's a bit difficult to read, it in fact reads the same data as there is in the date time column. It's just not formatted in such a clear way. This is a timestamp. And if you're aware of Unix timestamps, you'll know that this is based on the number of seconds since January the 1st, 1970. If you're not aware of Unix timestamps, then you don't need to worry about this piece of information. The date column will simply store the date in the format year, month, day. Time column will store hours, minutes and seconds just before 11 o'clock, and the year column will store the year in a 4-digit format. Now let's take a look at the use of the year column. So we're just inserting into Y, that's the year column, and we're going to put in the value 45. Now, as you might expect, the year column enters 2045. It's approximated what it thinks is the most likely date, the most likely year rather, from the values we put in. However, we may have wanted to say 1945, so that creates a bit of confusion. Let's say if we wanted to insert a different date into the what year column, the Y column represents years. Let's say we wanted to put in the year 71. Now this time, the 71 date would have been interpreted in the 20th century, that is 1971. The reason for this is if we try and enter a year rather, with just 2 digits, then MySQL will approximate, depending on whether it's before or after 70, whether we want to put 20 before it or 19. We can get round all of this by simply specifying what we want to the particular date that we want to put in. In this case, 1945. Then when we go to check the data, as you can see, the 4 digits are a much better and more reliable way of entering dates. Always do this if at all possible. Situations where it may not be possible would include when you're porting data from another application in which the dates are stored in 2-digit format. One more thing before we conclude this movie is if you look at the other columns, apart from the year column, as we've been entering data, they've all stayed null apart from the first one. Now this is because a timestamp column will automatically be updated with the current time and date, just as if we'd have specified that it should be that the function now should be inserted into the timestamp column. This only applies for the first timestamp. If you have more than one timestamp column in a particular table, then this will only happen to the first of the columns. You can get around this by, say, if you wanted to store a date and time in the timestamp format, and then you wanted to make a change to that particular row, but you didn't want the timestamp column to update, then you can get around that by simply setting the timestamp to its own value. This may seem a little strange, but it's a good way of keeping checks on when a row was last modified. In our next movie, we're going to look at some very handy functions for dealing with the date and time.